Sarah Martinez had always dreamed of serving her country. Growing up in a small Texas town, she watched her father polish his military medals every Sunday morning, listening to stories of honor, duty, and brotherhood. When she turned 18, Sarah knew exactly where her future lay, the United States Military Academy at West Point. The acceptance letter arrived on a crisp October morning. Her hands trembled as she read the words that would change her life forever. She was one of only a few women accepted that year, a fact that both thrilled and terrified her. Her father's eyes filled with pride as he hugged her tight, whispering that she would make their family proud. The first months at West Point were harder than anything Sarah had ever experienced. The physical training pushed her body to its limits. The academic workload seemed impossible. The strict discipline required constant attention to every detail, from how she made her bed to how she addressed her superiors. But Sarah was determined to prove she belonged there. Her roommate Jennifer came from a military family in California. The two young women bonded over late-night study sessions and shared struggles with the demanding routine. Jennifer had 3 older brothers who all served in different branches of the military. She understood the pressure Sarah felt as one of the few women in their class. The other cadets seemed to fall into different groups. Some were welcoming and supportive, treating Sarah and the other female cadets as equals. These were usually the ones who came from families with strong values about respect and fairness. They understood that everyone at West Point had earned their place through merit and hard work. But there was another group that made Sarah's stomach knot with anxiety. 4 cadets in particular seemed to take pleasure in making life difficult for the women in their class. Marcus Webb was their unofficial leader, a tall, muscular young man from Alabama, who came from generations of military officers. His grandfather had been a general, and Marcus never let anyone forget it. David Chen, despite his own status as a minority, seemed eager to prove himself by joining Marcus in his harassment. He was brilliant in mathematics and engineering, but lacked the emotional intelligence to see how his actions affected others. His parents had sacrificed everything to send him to America, and he felt pressure to succeed at any cost. James Rodriguez grew up in Chicago and had fought hard to escape a difficult neighborhood. He saw the military as his ticket to a better life and was terrified of showing any weakness. In his mind, supporting the female cadets somehow made him weak too. Tommy Sullivan from Boston rounded out the group, a young man who followed others rather than thinking for himself. These 4 made Sarah's daily life a constant challenge. During meals in the mess hall, they would make comments just loud enough for her to hear. They questioned whether women had the physical strength for combat roles. They suggested that female cadets were taking spots away from more deserving men. The comments were always careful, never quite crossing the line into official harassment that could be reported. In the dormitories, they would slam doors when she walked by. They would time their movements to crowd her in hallways, forcing her to step aside. During group exercises, they would subtly exclude her from planning sessions or ignore her suggestions entirely. It was death by 1,000 small cuts. Sarah tried to handle it on her own. She had been raised to be tough and independent. Her father had taught her that complaining would only make things worse. She focused on her studies and her training, determined to excel so thoroughly that no one could question her place at the academy. The academics at West Point were unlike anything she had faced before. Mathematics, science, engineering, history, and leadership courses all demanded perfection. Sarah spent hours in the library, often until late at night, making sure she understood every concept. Her grades were excellent, which only seemed to fuel the resentment of the 4 cadets who opposed her presence. Physical training was equally demanding. Every morning began with runs that tested endurance and strength. Sarah had always been athletic, but the military training pushed her beyond what she thought possible. She learned to rappel down walls, navigate obstacle courses, and handle weapons with precision. Her instructors noted her natural leadership abilities and her determination to succeed. The weapons training took place at the Academy's shooting range, a state-of-the-art facility where cadets learned to handle everything from pistols to assault rifles. Colonel James Harrison oversaw much of the training there. He was a decorated veteran who had served multiple tours overseas and had earned the respect of every cadet at the Academy. Colonel Harrison was known for his fairness and his absolute intolerance for any behavior that undermined unit cohesion. He believed that trust and mutual respect were essential for military effectiveness. His own daughter was serving as an officer in the Air Force, and he had seen firsthand how talented women could be in military roles. Sarah excelled at marksmanship. Her steady hands and careful attention to detail made her one of the best shooters in her class. She found peace in the focused concentration required at the range. The noise and chaos of everything else faded away when she aimed down the sight of her rifle. But even at the range, the harassment continued. The 4 cadets would position themselves near her during training sessions. They would make comments about her stance or suggest that she was only hitting targets because the instructors were going easy on her. They questioned whether she would be able to handle the pressure of real combat situations. Jennifer noticed the toll this was taking on her roommate. Sarah had become quieter and more withdrawn. She was losing weight and having trouble sleeping. The constant stress was affecting her performance in subtle ways that Sarah herself might not have recognized. The situation was building toward something that would test everyone involved. Sarah's resilience, the 4 cadets' true character, and the Academy's commitment to treating all cadets fairly. What happened next would become a story told for years afterward. A reminder of what leadership really means and how quickly situations can change when someone with real authority decides to act. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal who Sarah Martinez really was and what she was made of. It would also show whether the values taught at West Point were just words or principles that people were willing to defend when it mattered most. The spring semester brought new challenges and opportunities for the cadets at West Point. Sarah had survived her first year and was beginning to feel more confident in her abilities. Her grades remained at the top of her class and her physical fitness scores had improved dramatically. She was starting to believe she truly belonged at the academy. The weapons training program was intensifying as the cadets moved into more advanced courses. Colonel Harrison had introduced new scenarios that tested not just marksmanship, but decision-making under pressure. The cadets were learning to handle weapons in simulated combat situations, working in teams to complete complex missions. Sarah found herself naturally taking leadership roles during these exercises. Other cadets, particularly those who had gotten to know her well, began to respect her tactical thinking and calm demeanor under pressure. She had a gift for seeing the bigger picture and helping her team develop strategies that played to everyone's strengths. But the group of 4 cadets continued their campaign of subtle harassment. Marcus Webb had become increasingly frustrated by Sarah's success. His own performance, while adequate, didn't match the expectations that came with his family name. His grandfather's achievements cast a long shadow, and Marcus felt pressure to prove himself superior to his classmates. The harassment had evolved to become more sophisticated and harder to detect. During team exercises, the 4 would communicate with subtle signals to exclude Sarah from key decisions. They would volunteer for leadership positions specifically to prevent her from taking those roles. When she did speak up with suggestions, they would implement modified versions of her ideas without giving her credit. David Chen had developed a particular talent for undermining Sarah's confidence through seemingly helpful comments. He would offer technical corrections to her work that were actually incorrect, hoping to confuse her or make her doubt her own knowledge. When she would later discover his errors, he would claim he had simply made a mistake himself. James Rodriguez focused on spreading subtle rumors about Sarah's motivations for joining the military. He suggested to other cadets that she was only there to prove a political point, rather than genuine dedication to service. He questioned whether she would be reliable in actual combat situations, planting seeds of doubt among cadets who didn't know her well. Tommy Sullivan's role was often to serve as a witness to the others' actions, providing them with backup when they claimed their behavior was innocent. His presence made it harder for Sarah to confront any single incident, as there was always someone ready to provide an alternative explanation for what had happened. The psychological toll on Sarah was becoming more apparent to those who knew her best. Jennifer noticed that her roommate was spending even more time studying, as if she felt she had to be twice as good as everyone else just to be considered equal. Sarah had stopped participating in some of the informal social activities that helped cadets bond with each other. During this time, Sarah's parents visited the academy for a family weekend. Her father immediately noticed the change in his daughter's demeanor. The confident young woman who had left home was still there, but she seemed to be carrying a heavy burden. When he asked about it, Sarah insisted everything was fine, and that she was just working hard to meet the academy's high standards. Her mother was less easily fooled. During a quiet moment walking around the campus, she asked Sarah directly if anyone was giving her trouble. Sarah almost broke down and told her everything, but her pride and determination held her back. She couldn't bear the thought of her parents worrying about her or thinking she couldn't handle the challenges of military life. The spring weapons training culminated in a major assessment that would test everything the cadets had learned. They would be evaluated on individual marksmanship, team tactics, weapon maintenance, and leadership under pressure. The assessment would take place over several days at different ranges and training facilities around the academy. Colonel Harrison announced that this assessment would carry significant weight in their final grades for the course. More importantly, their performance would be noted in their permanent records and could influence their future assignments after graduation. The stakes were high, and every cadet felt the pressure to perform at their absolute best. Sarah threw herself into preparation with characteristic determination. She practiced at the range during every available free moment. She studied tactical manuals until late at night. She worked with Jennifer and other supportive classmates to practice team scenarios. Her dedication was noticed by instructors and fellow cadets alike. The 4 cadets who had been harassing Sarah saw this assessment as an opportunity to undermine her in a more significant way. They began planning ways to disrupt her performance that would be difficult to trace back to them. They studied her routines and identified moments when they might be able to interfere with her preparation or her actual performance during the assessment. Marcus Webb suggested they could create distractions during her shooting sessions or find ways to make her doubt her equipment. David Chen proposed more subtle psychological tactics, like spreading rumors about changes to the assessment format that might throw off her preparation. James Rodriguez wanted to find ways to exclude her from study groups where cadets shared helpful information, but their plans were about to be complicated by the presence of Colonel Harrison himself. The colonel had been quietly observing the dynamics among the cadets throughout the semester. His years of military experience had taught him to recognize the signs of unit dysfunction and interpersonal conflicts that could undermine mission effectiveness. Colonel Harrison had noticed that Sarah's performance, while excellent, showed signs of someone operating under unusual stress. He had also observed the behavior of the 4 cadets, noting their tendency to cluster together and their subtle exclusion of certain classmates from their activities. His instincts told him that something was not right. The colonel decided to pay closer attention during the upcoming assessment. He planned to observe not just the cadets' technical performance, but their interactions with each other. He understood that leadership and character were as important as shooting accuracy or tactical knowledge. As the assessment week approached, tension among the cadets was mounting. Sarah felt the weight of expectations and the constant pressure of having to prove herself. The 4 cadets were finalizing their plans to disrupt her performance. Colonel Harrison was preparing to evaluate not just individual skills, but the character and integrity of his students. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everyone involved. Sarah's resilience would be pushed to its limits. The 4 cadets would face a choice between their prejudices and their honor as future officers. Colonel Harrison would have to decide how to respond to what he suspected was happening among his cadets. The assessment would begin at the shooting range, where precision and concentration were essential. It was there that months of building tension would finally come to a head in a way that no one could have predicted. The next few days would reveal who these young people really were and what kind of leaders they would become. The morning of the assessment arrived with an unseasonably warm spring day. Sarah woke before dawn, as had become her habit, and spent an hour in meditation and mental preparation. She had learned this technique from her father, who used it before important missions during his military service. The quiet moments helped center her thoughts and calm her nerves. Jennifer was already awake when Sarah returned from her morning routine. The 2 roommates had developed a supportive friendship that helped them both navigate the challenges of academy life. Jennifer could see the determination in Sarah's eyes, but also noticed the tension in her shoulders that had become more pronounced over recent weeks. The assessment would begin at the main shooting range at 800 hours. Cadets were expected to arrive 30 minutes early to inspect their equipment and prepare their stations. Sarah gathered her gear methodically, checking every item twice. Her rifle was cleaned and calibrated perfectly. Her ammunition was organized precisely. Every detail had been attended to with military precision. As she walked across the campus toward the range, Sarah noticed the 4 cadets who had made her life difficult were already moving as a group in the same direction. Marcus Webb was talking animatedly to the others, gesturing with his hands in a way that suggested he was giving instructions. The sight made Sarah's stomach tighten, but she forced herself to focus on the task ahead. Colonel Harrison arrived at the range even earlier than the cadets, as was his custom. He believed in being present and prepared before expecting the same from those under his command. The range was set up with multiple shooting stations, each equipped with targets at various distances. The morning sun created perfect lighting conditions for the assessment. The colonel moved through the range, inspecting each station personally. He checked that targets were properly positioned, that safety equipment was in place, and that the scoring systems were functioning correctly. His attention to detail was legendary among the cadets, and they knew that nothing would be left to chance during such an important evaluation. Other instructors began arriving to assist with the assessment. Each would be responsible for observing specific aspects of cadet performance: technical skill, safety procedures, leadership behavior, and teamwork. The evaluation was designed to be comprehensive, testing not just individual abilities but character under pressure. Sarah arrived at her assigned station and began her pre-shooting inspection routine. She checked her rifle's sight alignment, tested the trigger mechanism, and verified that her shooting position was comfortable and stable. These preparations were second nature to her now, but she took extra care knowing that her performance was being closely watched. The 4 cadets took positions at stations that surrounded Sarah's location. This positioning appeared coincidental to casual observers, but Sarah recognized it as deliberate. They had arranged themselves so that she would be aware of their presence throughout the assessment. It was another psychological tactic designed to increase her stress and potentially affect her performance. Marcus Webb positioned himself at the station directly to Sarah's left. From this location, he could observe her technique and potentially create subtle distractions. David Chen took a position behind and to the right, where his movements would be visible in Sarah's peripheral vision. James Rodriguez and Tommy Sullivan flanked her other sides, completing the formation. Colonel Harrison noticed the positioning immediately. His years of experience had taught him to recognize patterns of behavior that might indicate problems within a unit. The way the 4 cadets had arranged themselves around Sarah was not random, and his instincts told him to pay close attention to what happened next. The assessment began with individual marksmanship tests. Each cadet would fire a prescribed number of rounds at targets at different distances, demonstrating accuracy and consistency under time pressure. The scores would be recorded and compared to established standards for their level of training. Sarah approached her first firing position with characteristic focus and determination. She assumed the proper stance, controlled her breathing, and began engaging targets with smooth, deliberate movements. Her first few shots hit the center of the target with impressive precision, confirming that her preparation had been thorough and effective. The 4 cadets began their own shooting sequences, but their attention seemed divided between their own performance and observing Sarah's technique. This split focus was affecting their accuracy, though they seemed more interested in her results than their own improvement. As the individual assessment continued, Marcus Webb started making subtle comments during reloading breaks. He would mention how the wind conditions were affecting his shots or how the morning sun was creating glare on the targets. His comments were loud enough for Sarah to hear and were clearly intended to plant suggestions about environmental factors that might affect her. Concentration, David Chen contributed by adjusting his equipment noisily during quiet moments when other cadets were aiming. The sounds of metal clicking and gear shifting created audio distractions that broke the concentration necessary for precision shooting. When other cadets looked his way, he would apologize quietly and claim he was having equipment problems. James Rodriguez employed a different tactic, positioning himself so that his movements would catch Sarah's peripheral vision during her aiming sequences. He would adjust his position, check his watch, or make other unnecessary movements at moments calculated to disrupt her focus. The timing was too consistent to be coincidental. Tommy Sullivan's role was to provide social reinforcement for the others' behavior. He would nod approvingly when they made their subtle disruptions or offer quiet encouragement for their tactics. His presence made the group dynamic more powerful and harder for Sarah to ignore or confront directly. Colonel Harrison observed all of this from his position behind the firing line. His experienced eye caught the deliberate nature of the four cadets' behavior. He recognized the classic pattern of coordinated harassment designed to undermine a target's performance while maintaining plausible deniability about individual actions. Despite the distractions, Sarah's performance remained strong. Her training and mental discipline helped her maintain focus on her targets and her technique. She completed the individual marksmanship portion with scores that placed her among the top performers in the assessment, confirming her reputation as one of the Academy's best shooters. The success seemed to frustrate the four cadets, who had expected their tactics to be more effective. Marcus Webb's expression showed clear annoyance that their psychological warfare had not achieved its intended result. The group began exchanging glances and subtle signals that suggested they were preparing to escalate their efforts. The next phase of the assessment would involve team-based exercises where cadets would work together to complete tactical scenarios. This presented new opportunities for the four cadets to undermine Sarah's performance in ways that might be harder to detect or prove. They were about to cross a line that would force Colonel Harrison to take action. The morning's events had established the pattern of harassment clearly enough for the colonel to recognize what was happening. The question now was how far the four cadets would go, and whether Sarah would be able to maintain her composure and performance under increasingly difficult circumstances. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everyone's character and commitment to the values they claimed to uphold. The team exercise phase of the assessment required cadets to work in groups of 5 to complete complex tactical scenarios. The exercises were designed to test leadership, communication, and decision-making under pressure, while maintaining weapon safety and accuracy. Each team member would rotate through leadership roles, ensuring everyone demonstrated their ability to both lead and follow. Colonel Harrison announced the team assignments, deliberately mixing cadets from different social groups to test their ability to work with anyone, regardless of personal relationships. Sarah found herself assigned to a team that included 2 cadets she knew well and respected, along with Marcus Webb and David Chen. The colonel's assignment was intentional. He wanted to observe how the dynamics would play out when harassment became more difficult to hide. The scenario involved clearing a mock compound where hostile forces were holding simulated hostages. The team would need to coordinate their movements, communicate effectively, and engage targets while avoiding civilian casualties. Each team member would take turns as the team leader, making critical decisions about tactics and resource allocation. Sarah's teammates, besides Marcus and David, were Jennifer and another cadet named Robert Kim. Robert was known for his fairness and integrity, qualities that had earned him respect throughout their class. Jennifer's presence provided Sarah with at least one ally, though she hoped personal relationships wouldn't affect the team's performance. The exercise began with Marcus Webb in the leadership role. As the team leader, he was responsible for briefing the mission, assigning roles, and making tactical decisions. From the start, his briefing excluded Sarah from key responsibilities, assigning her to what amounted to a support role while giving more prominent positions to the male team members. When Sarah raised questions about the tactical approach during the planning phase, Marcus dismissed her suggestions without serious consideration. He claimed that his plan was based on superior experience and knowledge, though his reasoning was flawed in ways that Jennifer and Robert immediately recognized. The tension within the team was becoming obvious to everyone involved. David Chen supported Marcus's decisions enthusiastically, even when they contradicted standard tactical principles taught in their coursework. His loyalty to the group dynamic seemed more important to him than mission effectiveness or fairness to all team members. This behavior was particularly disappointing to Robert, who had previously respected David's analytical abilities. As the team moved through the exercise, Marcus's poor leadership decisions began to create problems. His plan failed to account for civilian safety zones, potentially resulting in unacceptable casualties in a real situation. His communication system was confusing and ineffective, leading to coordination failures that could have been dangerous with live ammunition. Sarah found herself in an impossible position. Her training and instincts told her that the team's approach was fundamentally flawed, but speaking up against the designated leader could be seen as insubordination. She tried to offer constructive suggestions diplomatically, but Marcus consistently rejected her input while implementing similar ideas when they came from male team members. Colonel Harrison watched the exercise unfold from an elevated observation position that allowed him to monitor multiple teams simultaneously. He could hear the radio communications between team members and observe their movements through the course. The dysfunction in Sarah's team was becoming apparent through their poor coordination and ineffective tactics. The colonel noted that Sarah was adapting to her assigned role professionally, despite being underutilized by her team leader. Her movements were precise and safe. Her communication was clear and helpful, and she was making tactical observations that could have improved the team's performance if anyone had been listening to her suggestions. When it came time for Sarah to take the leadership role, the dynamic of the exercise changed dramatically. Her briefing was thorough and clear, incorporating lessons learned from the team's previous difficulties. She assigned roles based on each member's strengths and ensured that everyone understood their responsibilities and the overall mission objectives. Marcus and David immediately began undermining her leadership through passive resistance. They would acknowledge her orders but execute them slowly or imprecisely, creating delays and confusion. Their behavior was subtle enough to avoid obvious insubordination while still sabotaging the team's effectiveness. During the most critical phase of the exercise, when the team was approaching the hostage location, Marcus and David began communicating with each other privately, instead of following proper radio protocols. Their side conversations disrupted the team's coordination and created dangerous gaps in their tactical formation. Sarah maintained her professionalism and adapted her leadership style to work around the disruption. She repositioned team members to compensate for the lack of cooperation and continued to issue clear, appropriate orders. Her performance under pressure demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership skills the Academy was trying to develop in its cadets. But the situation was about to escalate beyond mere passive resistance. As the team completed their approach to the objective, Marcus and David made a decision that would force Colonel Harrison to intervene directly. They decided to ignore Sarah's tactical plan and implement their own approach without consulting her or the rest of the team. This action violated fundamental principles of military leadership and unit cohesion. In a real combat situation, such insubordination could result in mission failure and casualties. The two cadets were allowing their personal prejudices to override their professional training and their duty to their teammates. Jennifer and Robert found themselves caught between loyalty to their designated leader and pressure from teammates who were openly defying orders. The situation was testing not just Sarah's leadership abilities but everyone's commitment to military values and proper conduct under pressure. Colonel Harrison recognized that the exercise had moved beyond a training scenario into a real situation that required immediate intervention. The behavior he was witnessing violated core principles of military discipline and respect that were fundamental to the Academy's mission. The time for subtle observation had passed. The colonel began moving toward Sarah's team position, preparing to address a situation that had deteriorated beyond acceptable limits. His intervention would not just affect the immediate exercise but would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. The four cadets who had been harassing Sarah were about to face the full authority and judgment of a superior officer who had seen enough. Sarah was unaware of the colonel's approach, focused on trying to salvage the mission despite the undermining behavior of her teammates. She was about to discover that her months of enduring harassment had not gone unnoticed by those in authority, and that her professionalism under pressure had been observed and evaluated by someone with the power to ensure that proper standards were maintained. The confrontation that was about to unfold would serve as a defining moment for everyone involved, establishing clear consequences for unprofessional behavior while validating Sarah's dedication to military excellence and leadership principles. The critical moment arrived when Sarah's team reached the final objective of their tactical exercise. The simulated hostage rescue required precise coordination, clear communication, and absolute trust between team members. Sarah had positioned her team according to standard tactical principles, assigning each member a specific role that played to their strengths, while ensuring maximum safety for the simulated hostages. Marcus Webb and David Chen had been whispering together during the approach, their behavior becoming increasingly obvious to everyone on the team. Jennifer and Robert exchanged concerned glances, recognizing that their teammates were actively sabotaging the exercise. The situation had moved far beyond normal training difficulties into something that threatened the safety and effectiveness of everyone involved. As Sarah gave the final orders for the coordinated assault on the objective, Marcus suddenly announced that he and David would be implementing a different approach. He claimed that Sarah's plan was flawed and that their alternative would be more effective. This direct defiance of a designated leader's orders in the middle of a tactical operation violated every principle of military discipline they had been taught. David Chen immediately supported Marcus's declaration, adding technical justifications for their alternative plan that were clearly improvised and contradicted their training. The two cadets moved to implement their unauthorized approach, breaking the team's formation and potentially creating dangerous crossfire situations if this had been a real operation with live ammunition. Sarah faced an impossible choice. She could order them to return to position, knowing they would likely refuse and create an even more dangerous situation. She could abandon her leadership role and try to adapt to their reckless plan, effectively rewarding their insubordination. Or she could continue with her original plan using only the team members who were following orders, accepting that the mission would be compromised by the lack of full team participation. Jennifer and Robert found themselves in an equally difficult position. Military protocol demanded that they follow their designated leader's orders, but their teammates were creating a situation where following those orders might result in simulated casualties or mission failure. The exercise had become a test of character that none of them had expected. Colonel Harrison had been moving steadily closer to Sarah's team position, his experienced eye reading the developing situation with growing alarm. He could see through his binoculars that the team's formation was breaking down, and that unauthorized actions were being taken by individual team members. The radio communications he was monitoring confirmed that proper command structure was being ignored. The colonel increased his pace, recognizing that immediate intervention was necessary to prevent the situation from deteriorating further. His years of military experience had taught him that leadership challenges like this one required swift, decisive action to restore order and reinforce proper standards of conduct. As Marcus and David moved to execute their unauthorized plan, they approached Sarah's position in a way that surrounded her at the shooting station. Their movements were aggressive and intimidating, designed to force her to abandon her leadership role and accept their alternative approach. The physical positioning created a confrontational dynamic that went far beyond tactical disagreement. Sarah maintained her composure despite being outnumbered and surrounded by hostile teammates. Her training had prepared her for leadership under pressure, and she refused to be intimidated into abandoning her responsibilities. She continued to issue clear professional orders while documenting the insubordination she was witnessing. The four cadets who had been harassing Sarah throughout the semester, Marcus, David, James Rodriguez, and Tommy Sullivan, had finally made their coordinated move. James and Tommy, who were on nearby teams, had positioned themselves to observe the confrontation and provide support for their friends if needed. Their presence created an even more intimidating atmosphere for Sarah and her loyal teammates. Within seconds of the four cadets closing in around Sarah's position, Colonel Harrison arrived at the scene. His approach was swift but controlled, his command presence immediately apparent to everyone in the area. The colonel's expression was stern and focused, reflecting his assessment that the situation had crossed unacceptable lines. The timing of the colonel's intervention was crucial. Sarah had been surrounded by the four cadets for approximately 45 seconds, long enough for their intentions to become clear, but not long enough for the situation to escalate into something more serious. The colonel's quick response prevented what could have become a dangerous confrontation between cadets who should have been working as teammates. Colonel Harrison's voice carried the unmistakable authority of command as he called for immediate attention from all cadets in the area. The four who had been surrounding Sarah stepped back quickly, recognizing that their behavior had been observed by someone with the power to end their military careers before they had truly begun. Sarah straightened to attention immediately, relief washing over her as she realized that her months of enduring harassment had finally been witnessed by someone in authority. The colonel's presence validated her professionalism and confirmed that the behavior she had been experiencing was indeed unacceptable by military standards. Jennifer and Robert also came to attention, grateful that the impossible situation they had been placed in was now being addressed by proper authority. They had maintained their integrity throughout the crisis, supporting their designated leader while avoiding participation in the insubordination that had threatened their team's mission. The exercise came to an immediate halt as Colonel Harrison took control of the situation. Other instructors who had been monitoring different teams began converging on the location, recognizing that a significant disciplinary issue was unfolding. The assessment had revealed far more about character and leadership than anyone had expected. Colonel Harrison's intervention marked the beginning of consequences for months of coordinated harassment that had been designed to undermine Sarah's position at the academy. The 4 cadets who had thought their behavior was subtle and undetectable were about to learn that experienced military leaders recognize patterns of unprofessional conduct even when individual incidents might seem minor. That the confrontation that had been building throughout the semester was finally coming to a head, with clear lines drawn between those who upheld military values and those who had allowed personal prejudices to override their professional training. What happened next would determine not just the immediate consequences for those involved, but would send a message about standards and expectations that would influence the entire cadet corps. Colonel Harrison's presence transformed the atmosphere at the shooting range instantly. His command voice cut through the tension as he ordered all cadets to maintain their positions and prepare for immediate debriefing. The authority in his tone left no doubt that serious consequences were about to follow for those who had violated military discipline and professional conduct. The colonel's first action was to ensure the safety of all personnel and secure the training area. He instructed the range safety officers to clear all weapons and establish a safe zone where the developing situation could be addressed without any risk to cadets or instructors. The military precision of his response demonstrated why he had earned the respect of everyone at the academy. Marcus Webb, David Chen, James Rodriguez, and Tommy Sullivan stood at attention, their earlier confidence evaporating as they realized the full implications of their actions. The colonel's reputation for fairness was matched by his absolute intolerance for any behavior that undermined military values or threatened unit cohesion. They were about to face accountability for months of conduct they had thought was too subtle to detect. Sarah remained at attention, her professionalism intact despite the emotional toll of the confrontation she had just endured. The colonel's timely intervention validated her months of maintaining composure and dedication to duty, despite constant harassment. Her relief was evident but controlled, reflecting the military bearing she had developed throughout her time at the academy. Colonel Harrison began his assessment by interviewing each participant individually, starting with the cadets who had maintained proper conduct throughout the exercise. Jennifer and Robert provided clear, factual accounts of what they had witnessed, describing the pattern of insubordination and harassment they had observed not just during this exercise but throughout the semester. Their testimony painted a detailed picture of coordinated behavior designed to undermine Sarah's performance and create a hostile environment. The colonel's experienced questioning revealed the systematic nature of the harassment, from subtle psychological tactics to overt defiance of military authority during the tactical exercise. When Colonel Harrison interviewed Sarah, she provided a comprehensive but professional account of her experiences. She described specific incidents of harassment, documented the impact on her training environment, and explained how she had attempted to address the situation through proper channels without success. Her testimony was factual and focused, demonstrating the leadership qualities that had impressed her. Instructors throughout her time at the academy. The colonel then turned his attention to the 4 cadets who had been surrounding Sarah. His questioning was methodical and thorough, designed to establish the facts without allowing room for deception or minimization of their actions. Years of military experience had taught him to recognize patterns of behavior and to distinguish between isolated incidents and systematic misconduct. Marcus Webb attempted to justify his actions by claiming that he was simply trying to improve the team's tactical approach. He insisted that his defiance of Sarah's orders was based on legitimate tactical concerns, rather than personal prejudice. However, his explanations quickly fell apart under the colonel's experienced questioning, which revealed the coordinated nature of his behavior and its clear intent to undermine Sarah's authority. David Chen tried a different approach, claiming that cultural differences had led to misunderstandings about proper military protocol. He suggested that his actions were the result of confusion rather than deliberate insubordination. Colonel Harrison, who had served with distinguished officers from many backgrounds, quickly dismantled this excuse by pointing out that military standards are universal and that David's academic performance proved he understood the principles. He had chosen to violate James Rodriguez and Tommy Sullivan. When confronted with evidence of their participation in the harassment campaign, initially tried to minimize their involvement. They claimed they were simply supporting their friends and hadn't realized their behavior was inappropriate. The colonel's questioning revealed the calculated nature of their actions and their understanding of the impact their behavior was having on Sarah and the unit's effectiveness. Colonel Harrison's investigation extended beyond the immediate incident to examine the broader pattern of behavior that had developed over months. He interviewed other cadets who had witnessed the harassment, reviewed performance records that showed the impact on unit cohesion, and consulted with other instructors who had observed concerning dynamics in various training situations. The evidence that emerged painted a clear picture of systematic harassment designed to create a hostile environment for female cadets. The behavior violated not only military discipline, but also the Academy's fundamental values of respect, integrity, and commitment to developing leaders of character. The colonel recognized that this situation required decisive action to send a clear message about acceptable conduct. The immediate consequences were swift and comprehensive. Marcus Webb, David Chen, James Rodriguez, and Tommy Sullivan were placed on disciplinary probation and removed from all leadership positions within the Cadet Corps. They were required to undergo counseling on military ethics and proper conduct, with their continued enrollment at the Academy dependent on demonstrating genuine reform in their attitudes and behavior. More significantly, the incident was documented in their permanent records, which would follow them throughout their military careers if they were allowed to continue. The colonel made it clear that any future incidents would result in immediate dismissal from the Academy, ending their dreams of military service before they had truly begun. Colonel Harrison also implemented broader changes to address the systemic issues that had allowed the harassment to continue for so long. He established new reporting procedures that made it easier for cadets to report inappropriate behavior without fear of retaliation. Training programs were enhanced to address bias and discrimination more directly, ensuring that all cadets understood the standards expected of military leaders. Sarah's response to the colonel's intervention was characterized by the same professionalism she had maintained throughout her ordeal. She expressed gratitude for his support, while emphasizing her commitment to continuing her military training and development. Her focus remained on becoming the best officer she could be, rather than dwelling on the difficulties she had overcome. The impact of Colonel Harrison's decisive action extended far beyond the immediate participants. Word of the incident spread throughout the Cadet Corps, sending a clear message that harassment and discrimination would not be tolerated at any level. The colonel's intervention became a turning point in the Academy's culture, reinforcing values of respect and inclusion that are essential for military effectiveness. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's performance continued to excel, as she was finally able to focus on her training without the constant stress of harassment. Her natural leadership abilities flourished in an environment where her contributions were valued and respected. Other female cadets, inspired by her perseverance and the Academy's response, found new confidence in their own military careers. The 4 cadets who had engaged in the harassment faced a difficult period of reflection and reform. Some genuinely learned from the experience and developed into better leaders, while others struggled to overcome the prejudices that had driven their behavior. Their futures in military service would depend on their ability to embrace the values they had previously rejected. Colonel Harrison's intervention became a defining moment in the Academy's history, demonstrating that leadership means taking action when it matters most. His willingness to confront inappropriate behavior and enforce standards sent a message that resonated throughout the military community and beyond. Years later, Sarah Martinez would graduate with honors and go on to serve with distinction in various leadership roles throughout her military career. She would often reflect on the lesson learned from Colonel Harrison's intervention, that true leadership requires the courage to do what is right, even when it is difficult or unpopular. The story of what happened at the shooting range that day became part of the Academy's oral tradition, passed down to new cadets as an example of how military values should be upheld in practice. It served as a reminder that the principles of honor, respect, and integrity are not just words in a manual but standards that must be actively defended by those in positions of authority. Colonel Harrison's 45-second intervention had lasting consequences that extended far beyond that single moment. It demonstrated that experienced leaders recognize patterns of inappropriate behavior and have the responsibility to act decisively when military values are threatened. His response became a model for how institutions can address discrimination and harassment while maintaining the high standards essential for military effectiveness.